The unexpected arrival. The quiet, vast emptiness of space was suddenly shattered by an unexpected sight. Out of nowhere, a colossal shadow loomed in the distance. It was unlike anything the Galactic Overlords had ever seen. The sensors on their ships buzzed with activity as they detected the presence of this massive object cutting through their territory. For centuries, the Overlords ruled the galaxy with an iron fist. They had crushed countless species, destroyed entire civilizations, and left nothing standing in their wake. No one dared challenge their power, not even the most advanced of civilizations. The Overlords had never known fear. But now, something was different. The object approaching their empire was huge, far bigger than anything they had in their fleet. The ships of the Overlords, designed to strike terror into the hearts of their enemies, looked like mere toys compared to the unknown vessel. It was like a mountain moving through space, and its sheer size alone sent a chill down the spines of those who watched from the command centers. "This can't be right," one of the Overlords muttered, his voice thick with disbelief. "Scan it again. It has to be a mistake." But the scan results came back the same. The enormous vessel was moving slowly but steadily toward their most protected space, their home. The Overlords had no idea who it was, but one thing was clear: this was no ordinary ship. As the object came closer, the ship's design became more evident. It was built like nothing in the galaxy. It had no smooth curves or sleek features like the ships of the Overlords. Instead, it was rough, angular, and heavily armored, its exterior designed for maximum defense. The metal seemed almost alive, pulsing with energy, as if the ship itself had a heartbeat. It was unlike anything the Overlords had seen, and they didn't know whether to be intrigued or terrified. No species in the galaxy had such technology. How had this ship come to be? And more importantly, who was aboard it? The ship continued to draw closer, passing through the heavily patrolled space with ease. The Overlords' defensive systems were second to none, designed to keep out even the most daring of enemies. Yet this vessel moved without hesitation, ignoring every attempt to halt its progress. "Prepare to launch interceptors," an Overlord commander ordered. "We can't let this thing get any closer to our core worlds." But even as the command was given, the ships were already too late. The unknown vessel was too fast. It was already within the heart of the Overlord's protected space. There was no time to deploy reinforcements. The Dreadnought, what else could it be called, had arrived. In the control room of the Overlord's flagship, the officers stood frozen, their eyes fixed on the view screen. The massive ship continued its slow journey forward, showing no signs of slowing down. The black void of space was no longer empty. It was filled with a massive, looming presence that could not be ignored. Suddenly, a loud alarm blared throughout the ship. "Ship incoming. Fast." It wasn't an enemy fleet. It wasn't a group of rebel ships. It was one single vessel, and it was heading straight for them. The sheer audacity of it struck the Overlords like a bolt of lightning. They had ruled the galaxy for millennia, and yet here was this mysterious ship that dared to enter their space as if they were nothing more than an afterthought. "This is impossible," another Overlord muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. "We have not seen such a ship, nor any sign of it in our records. There's no way anyone could have built this." But there it was, the massive Dreadnought, its hull a dark silhouette against the stars, continued its course unchallenged. "Send a fleet to intercept it immediately," one of the Overlords commanded. "Prepare the weapons. We'll destroy it before it gets any further." But even as the orders were being given, something unexpected happened. The Dreadnought, in one swift motion, unleashed a terrifying energy pulse. The blast was so powerful that it overloaded the sensors of the Overlord ships, temporarily blinding their systems. The pulse tore through the darkness of space, shaking the very foundation of their fleet. The Overlord ships reeled back, their shields flashing in a desperate attempt to defend themselves. But it was already too late. The Dreadnought had made its point. It had arrived, and it was sending a message loud and clear. You are not in control anymore. In the silence that followed, one of the Overlords spoke, his voice trembling. Who is this?" he asked. His words were almost a whisper, filled with a sense of dread that he had never felt before. The Overlords had never known fear, but now something was different. For the first time in their lives, they realized they might be facing something they couldn't destroy. The ship moved closer, its power and size undeniable. The Overlords had underestimated humanity, and now they would see what the human race was truly capable of. The Dreadnought was only the beginning. The galaxy was about to change in ways the Overlords could never have imagined. And as the Overlords watched in stunned silence, they knew that their time of unchallenged rule was over. The humans had come, and nothing would ever be the same again. The first strike. The vast emptiness of space hummed with tension. For the first time in centuries, the Galactic Overlords found themselves paralyzed with uncertainty. The Dreadnought, humanity's last stand, or perhaps something even more, loomed ominously in their territory. It was massive, with technology they had never seen, and a firepower unlike anything they had ever encountered. For the Overlords, this was more than just an intrusion. It was a threat to everything they had worked for, an insult to their unmatched power. They had conquered countless civilizations, crushed rebellions, and ruled entire star systems without any true challenge. But now, there was this, a human ship, capable of disabling their most advanced defense systems with a single pulse of energy. How could it be? The Overlords had always prided themselves on being the superior force in the galaxy. They thought themselves untouchable, invincible. But now, they were beginning to question that belief. In their war room, the commanders were frantic. Reports of the Dreadnought's advance continued to flood in, each one more disturbing than the last. The ship showed no signs of slowing. No diplomatic plea would reach it. This was no ordinary enemy. This was war. "We cannot let them reach the heart of our empire," one of the Overlords said, his voice shaking with fury. "We will destroy them before they can strike." The decision was made. The time for hesitation was over. The Overlords' fleets, always ready to crush anything that dared oppose them, now sprang into action. Thousands of ships, powered by the best technology the Overlords could muster, began their journey toward the massive Dreadnought. As the fleets moved, their weapons powered up. The Overlords had one goal now: to annihilate this human ship before it could do any more damage. Meanwhile, inside the Dreadnought, Captain Evelyn Blackwood stood in front of the command console, her fingers flying over the controls. She was calm, focused, but there was a fire in her eyes, a determination born of years of planning, years of knowing that one day humanity would take a stand. And that day had come. "Report," Captain Blackwood said in a firm voice. "Overlord's fleet approaching, Captain. Multiple ships, heavily armed," her communications officer replied, his voice steady but strained. "Do we have their location?" she asked, her gaze fixed on the tactical display. The vast emptiness of space on the screen was now filled with the approaching threats. Dozens of warships, each one a powerful machine of destruction. "They're coming fast, Captain. It won't be long before they arrive." Blackwood nodded. She had anticipated this moment. The Overlords were not going to let humanity walk into their empire unchallenged. But humanity had prepared as well. They had something the Overlords would never expect. "Prepare the weapons," Captain Blackwood ordered. "It's time to show them what humanity is capable of." The ship's massive guns powered up, their hum growing louder as they charged. The Overlords would see that humanity had learned from their mistakes, and they had learned quickly. The Dreadnought's engines roared to life, and the ship began to move toward the advancing Overlord's fleet. It was a calculated risk. The Overlord's ships were fast, but they couldn't match the sheer power of the Dreadnought's weaponry. Blackwood was counting on it. "Once we make contact, we're not retreating," she said, her voice cold and determined. We'll fight until the end. We didn't come all this way to lose." The crew nodded in silent agreement. They knew what was at stake. This was humanity's chance to prove they were no longer weak. They were no longer the underdogs. As the fleets drew closer, the tension was unbearable. The air aboard the Dreadnought was thick with anticipation. Then, without warning, the first shots were fired. The Overlords' fleet launched a volley of laser beams and plasma bombs, designed to obliterate anything in their path. But the Dreadnought's shields flared to life, absorbing the energy. It was an unexpected sight for the Overlords' forces. Their weapons had no effect. The shields held strong, as though the ship was invincible. The crew of the Dreadnought held their breath. The first wave of fire had been deflected, but they knew this was just the beginning. The Overlord's fleet wasn't going to back down that easily. Suddenly, the Dreadnought's weapons fired in retaliation. The ship's guns unleashed a torrent of energy blasts, each one tearing through the Overlord's ships with brutal precision. The Overlord's ships exploded in fiery showers of debris, their advanced technology unable to withstand the onslaught. The battle had begun. The Overlords watched in disbelief as their fleets were torn apart. The human Dreadnought had shown no mercy, cutting through their forces like a knife through butter. The ships that once seemed invincible were now powerless against humanity's newest weapon. On board the Dreadnought, Captain Blackwood stood with her arms crossed, watching the chaos unfold on the view screen. "Report," she said calmly. "We've taken down 2 ships, Captain," her tactical officer replied, his voice steady despite the battle raging around them. "The rest are retreating. They're not ready for this." "Good," Blackwood said, her voice still calm. "Keep up the pressure. We can't let them regroup." The Overlords were stunned. They had never imagined that humanity would fight back like this. They thought they could crush them easily, but they had underestimated the human spirit. The Dreadnought moved forward, its guns firing relentlessly. More Overlord ships exploded, their wreckage scattered across the cold expanse of space. The Overlord's forces were reeling. They had never faced anything like this before. The message was clear now. Humanity wasn't backing down. They weren't going to be crushed. And the Overlords were learning the hard way that underestimating humans would be their greatest mistake. As the Overlords struggled to make sense of this unexpected turn of events, one thing became certain. This battle was only the beginning. The human Dreadnought was not the only force humanity had at their disposal. And the Overlord's time of unchecked power was rapidly coming to an end. The Overlords panicked. The once dominant Galactic Overlords found themselves scrambling for answers. The unexpected arrival of the human Dreadnought had thrown them into a state of panic. Their superior fleets, once believed to be unstoppable, were now shattered by the precision and power of the human ship. The Overlords were not used to losing, especially not to a species they had deemed insignificant for so long. In their high command center, the Overlords gathered in a chaotic frenzy. Their warlords, usually composed and methodical, were now a picture of unease. The very core of their empire was under threat, and they had no idea how to stop it. "Impossible," one of the Overlords bellowed, his reptilian features twisted with anger. "This cannot be happening. We've defeated entire star systems with less effort. What are these humans? They have technology we don't understand." Another Overlord murmured, his voice betraying the fear creeping into his mind. "Their ship it's more advanced than anything we've encountered." "Their weapons are overwhelming," said a third, her hands shaking as she examined the wreckage of their fleet displayed on the holomap. "The first wave of our attack was annihilated. It's like they knew exactly how to counter us." The panic spread like wildfire among the Overlords. They had prided themselves on their near-immortal reign, their technological superiority. But now, humanity had shown them that power could be overturned. The Dreadnought had defied all their expectations, and the message was clear. Humanity was not the weak, helpless race they had thought them to be. "We cannot let them advance," one of the Overlords declared, his voice now desperate. If they reach the heart of our empire, all will be lost. We must destroy them before they can cause more damage. But as they scrambled for a solution, they found that they were quickly running out of time. The human dreadnought was heading straight for their capital world, the heart of their empire. The overlords could feel their control slipping through their fingers. "Prepare the remaining fleets," the leader of the overlords commanded, slamming his fist on the table. "We'll throw everything we have at them. Every last ship will be sent to destroy that vessel." Despite the odds, the overlords were determined. They would not be humiliated by this human ship. Their pride was on the line. The fate of the galaxy's most powerful empire hung in the balance. Back on the Dreadnought, Captain Evelyn Blackwood was calmly surveying the situation. Her crew had remained steady in the face of the relentless attack. The overlords had underestimated humanity's resolve, and now they would pay the price. "Captain, the enemy is regrouping," her tactical officer reported, his voice unwavering. "They're preparing for another assault." Blackwood glanced at the holomap of the galaxy. The overlord's fleet was regrouping, forming an even larger force than before. Their ships were larger, faster, and more heavily armored. But she had learned something in the past few hours. The overlords may have more ships, but humanity had something they didn't: innovation and determination. "Do we have any data on their weaknesses?" Blackwood asked, her mind racing. She wasn't one to underestimate an enemy, but she knew the overlords' arrogance could be their downfall. "Most of their fleet is heavily armored," the tactical officer replied. "However, we've detected some vulnerabilities in their flagship. The armor is thinner around the central core." Captain Blackwood's eyes narrowed. It was exactly what she needed. "Good. Let's give them a taste of their own medicine," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "We're going to hit their flagship directly. Prepare the main cannon." Her crew worked quickly, and the ship's massive energy cannon powered up. It was a weapon designed to break through even the toughest defenses. But it wasn't just about the weapon. It was about sending a message. The overlords were about to learn that humanity would not bend. The human race had risen, and they would not stop until they had secured their place in the galaxy. As the Dreadnought moved forward, Captain Blackwood ordered her ship to engage at maximum speed. The human ship's weapons fired with pinpoint accuracy, tearing through the overlord's smaller ships like they were paper. But then, as the overlord's flagship came into view, Blackwood gave the command. "Fire." The main cannon of the Dreadnought unleashed a blast of pure energy. The beam shot across the vast distance of space, striking the flagship dead center. The energy erupted upon impact, sending shockwaves through the ship as the core began to rupture. The overlord's flagship, the symbol of their power, was falling apart. The massive ship trembled as if it was about to collapse in on itself. The crew of the Dreadnought watched in awe as their shot landed with devastating precision. "Direct hit," the tactical officer confirmed, his voice filled with satisfaction. For the first time since the battle began, the overlords were silent. They watched in horror as their flagship began to break apart, their most prized possession turned to debris. The Dreadnought had struck them where it hurt the most, and they had no way to stop it. Blackwood stood motionless, her gaze fixed on the damage. This was just the beginning. The overlords would not surrender easily, but now they knew the humans were not the underdogs anymore. Humanity was here to stay, and the overlords would have to adjust to a new reality, one where they were no longer the supreme rulers of the galaxy. The last stand. The destruction of the overlord's flagship sent shockwaves throughout their entire empire. The once proud galactic rulers, accustomed to bending entire species to their will, now found themselves fighting for survival against a race they had long underestimated. The human Dreadnought, a symbol of defiance and resilience, had become a nightmare to their vast fleets. The overlords, leaders of the galaxy for millennia, had been forced into a corner. Back in their war command center, the remaining overlords struggled to maintain composure. The once perfect order of their empire was rapidly dissolving. Their warlords, who had once stood proudly in their presence, now cowered under the weight of the human threat. Every plan they had meticulously crafted over thousands of years was falling apart. Their most powerful weapon had been destroyed. They had no time to waste. "Regroup the remaining fleets," the Supreme Overlord shouted. His voice, a deep guttural growl, was filled with desperation. "We can still crush them if we act swiftly. Send everything we have left. Humanity will not desecrate our domain." But deep down, even the Supreme Overlord knew their chances were slim. The human Dreadnought had proven to be more than just a ship. It was a force of nature. Every weapon they threw at it had been rendered useless. Every tactic they employed countered. And now, as the human Dreadnought advanced toward their core systems, there was little left they could do. In the command center aboard the human ship, Captain Blackwood remained calm despite the growing tension. Her eyes scanned the galactic map as the Overlord's fleets began to regroup. The enemy was preparing for one final strike. They would throw everything they had left at her and her crew. Blackwood had expected this, but she was ready. "Status on the enemy fleets," she asked her tactical officer, her voice steady. "They formed a unified force, Captain," the officer reported, his hands flying over the controls. "It's their last stand. They've gathered every ship capable of fighting. We'll be facing overwhelming numbers." Blackwood nodded. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She had to end this, once and for all. "Good. Prepare all weapons systems. We're going straight to their capital," she ordered. The crew worked efficiently, their actions sharp and precise. The Dreadnought's massive engines roared to life, and the ship surged forward into enemy territory. Blackwood's hand tightened around the command console as she stared at the map of the galaxy. The Overlord's capital was just a few jumps away. Once they reached it, there would be no turning back. As they entered the heart of Overlord space, the human Dreadnought was met with resistance. Wave after wave of enemy ships converged on their position, but each one was swiftly eliminated by the Dreadnought's powerful energy cannons and devastating missile barrage. The Overlords had no choice but to throw their fleets into a massive assault, hoping that overwhelming firepower would be enough to bring down the human ship. The battle raged on, with the human Dreadnought cutting through the Overlord fleet like a blade through paper. But even as their ships were destroyed, the Overlord's resolve remained unbroken. They were determined to protect their home, their capital, and their legacy. "We can't let them breach the capital," one of the Overlord warlords yelled, his voice filled with a mix of anger and fear. "We must hold them at all costs." But Captain Blackwood had already anticipated their tactics. She knew the Overlords would fight to the bitter end, and she knew exactly how to break them. "Target their fleet command ships," Blackwood ordered, her eyes locked on the holographic display in front of her. "If we can disable their leadership, their entire fleet will fall apart." The crew worked quickly to identify the Overlord's command vessels, massive ships that coordinated the movements of their fleets. One by one, they locked onto the command ships, firing powerful energy blasts that obliterated the vessels in mere seconds. Without their commanders, the Overlord's fleets quickly descended into chaos. "They're scattering, Captain," the tactical officer reported. "They're falling apart." Blackwood could see the panic spreading across the enemy forces. The Overlords were no longer a unified front. Their once great empire was crumbling, and they knew it. The human Dreadnought had shattered their fleets, and the capital was now within striking range. "We're going in," Blackwood said, determination in her voice. As they neared the capital, the Overlords launched their final line of defense. A massive fleet of warships, far larger than anything Blackwood had faced before, emerged from the planet's atmosphere. It was their last hope, a desperate attempt to stop the human juggernaut before it could land on their world and deliver the final blow. But Captain Blackwood had no intention of stopping. With a calmness that belied the gravity of the situation, she gave the order. "Activate the main cannon. Let's finish this." The Dreadnought's main cannon hummed to life, its energy core crackling with raw power. The massive beam of light fired straight at the heart of the Overlords' defense. The blast cut through their fleet like a scythe through wheat, reducing their warships to debris in mere moments. The remaining Overlord ships tried to retaliate, but they were outmatched. One by one, they were destroyed as Blackwood's crew expertly maneuvered the Dreadnought, dodging and countering with precision. In the end, the Overlords had no way to fight back. Their fleets were shattered. Their capital was within the humans' grasp. With the Overlords in full retreat, Captain Blackwood knew this was the turning point. Humanity had just defeated the most powerful empire in the galaxy. The Overlords had underestimated them. But now, they would face the consequences. "Prepare for final assault," Blackwood said, her voice firm. "It's time to end this war." The fate of the galaxy was now in humanity's hands. The fall of the Overlords. The human Dreadnought, unstoppable in its march toward the Overlord capital, now entered the final stage of the battle. The vast expanse of the Overlord's homeworld loomed ahead, a place once known as the center of their mighty empire. Its once glorious skyline was now reduced to crumbling ruins, the remnants of a civilization that had thought itself invincible. The Overlords had ruled for thousands of years, subjugating countless species. But now, their reign was ending, and the humans had come to claim victory. Captain Blackwood stood at the helm, staring out at the shattered remains of the Overlord fleet. The capital planet was just a few moments away. The immense pressure of the moment weighed heavily on her shoulders, but she knew this was the only way to ensure humanity's future. "Status report," Blackwood said, her voice steady, though the battle had taken a toll on them all. "Enemy forces are in retreat, Captain," the tactical officer responded. "The last remaining fleets are attempting to regroup, but they are disorganized and demoralized. It's only a matter of time before they fall apart." Blackwood nodded. The Overlord's military might have been shattered, but they were not finished yet. She could sense that the Overlords would do anything to defend their capital. This final battle would be their last stand. "Prepare the troops," Blackwood ordered. "We go in strong. Make sure we leave nothing behind." The Dreadnought's engines rumbled as it drew closer to the planet's surface. The once mighty capital city of the Overlords now stood vulnerable. The humans had broken their defenses and were now about to land in the heart of their territory. Meanwhile, on the ground, the Overlord leaders gathered in a hidden chamber deep beneath the surface of their planet. They knew their fate was sealed, but they refused to surrender. They would die fighting, clinging to their power as they had done for eons. "Our enemies are at the gates," the Supreme Overlord said, his voice strained with the weight of impending defeat. "But we will not go down without a fight. We will use every last weapon, every last resource we have." His advisors, broken and weary, nodded in grim agreement. The Overlords had no choice but to make one final stand, to give humanity a battle they would never forget. Back in orbit, the human Dreadnought deployed its troops, sending down waves of highly trained soldiers in specialized drop pods. The pods fell toward the surface, their descent marked by the roar of plasma thrusters. Each soldier, clad in the latest battle armor, prepared for the final assault. As the pods hit the ground, explosions shook the surface of the Overlord capital. The ground forces launched an all-out attack on the Overlord defenses, moving through crumbling streets and destroyed structures. The Overlords had prepared their last line of defense: robotic sentinels and automated turrets that would hold humanity back as long as they could. But these machines, created to subjugate weaker species, were no match for humanity's resolve. The human soldiers advanced with precision and speed, their weapons cutting down the Overlord sentinels like a hot knife through butter. The Overlord's defenses were overwhelmed in a matter of hours. "Captain, we've breached the city's main defense grid," the lead commander of the human forces reported. "We're moving toward the palace." Blackwood's expression remained hard as stone. The battle was almost over. They were about to take the heart of the Overlord's empire. But even now, she knew that the Overlords would not go down quietly. As the human soldiers approached the central palace, the air crackled with energy. The Overlords had activated their last-ditch weapon, a massive energy cannon hidden beneath the palace. The weapon could destroy entire fleets, but it would also destroy the city and everything around it. "Captain, we've detected the weapon," the tactical officer warned. "It's powering up. They're about to fire." Blackwood's mind raced. The weapon had to be stopped, or the entire mission would be in vain. She had no time to waste. "Target the weapon's core. I want it disabled now," she commanded. The Dreadnought's main cannon fired once again, sending a blast that tore through the atmosphere. It slammed into the palace's energy shield, causing a massive explosion. The Overlord's weapon began to destabilize, and the shockwave rattled the ground beneath the soldiers' feet. Inside the palace, the Supreme Overlord stood, watching as his empire collapsed. His last hope, the weapon he had placed his faith in, was destroyed in a single shot. He turned to his remaining guards, the last of his loyal warriors. "There is no escape now," the Supreme Overlord whispered. "We fought and lost. Let the humans finish what they started." As the Overlord's capital fell into chaos, the human forces pushed forward. The last of the Overlord leaders attempted to flee, but it was futile. The human soldiers cornered them in the Grand Throne Room, where the Supreme Overlord stood, surrounded by his guards. Captain Blackwood entered the room with a determined expression. The Overlords had shown no mercy to countless worlds, but now it was time for them to answer for their crimes. "The galaxy is changing," Blackwood said, her voice cold but resolute. "You have terrorized and enslaved countless species. Today, humanity takes control of its own destiny." The Supreme Overlord sneered. "You think you've won. We are the rulers of the stars. You are nothing." "We are something," Blackwood replied, her voice unwavering. "We are humanity, and we will never bow to you." With a final strike, the last remnants of the Overlord's power were eradicated. The human forces had taken the capital, destroyed the weapon, and shattered the Overlord's empire. Their reign was over. The galaxy, once trembling under the shadow of the Overlords, was now free. Humanity had triumphed, not just as survivors, but as conquerors. The Black Armada that had once threatened the stars now lay in ruin, and humanity had taken its place at the forefront of galactic power. Captain Blackwood looked out over the burning city as the sun set behind her. The battle was over. The war was won. But this was only the beginning. Humanity's future had just begun. The Overlord's last stand. The final moments of the Overlord's reign were slipping away, and their desperation filled the air with a heavy tension. The once mighty empire was crumbling, its capital city reduced to burning ruins. Captain Blackwood stood at the head of her forces, her heart pounding with the realization that the galaxy was now on the brink of a new era, a new order that humanity would lead. But before she could even process the weight of this moment, the sound of explosions echoed across the battlefield. The Overlords weren't ready to give up yet. Their elites had retreated underground, and their last forces were scrambling to form some kind of defense. The Overlords had always prided themselves on their advanced technology and devastating weaponry, but now, in the face of defeat, they were forced to rely on the most desperate measures. "Captain, we've detected unusual activity near the Central Palace." The tactical officer's voice crackled through Blackwood's comlink. "It's the last remnants of their royal guard. They're preparing something." Blackwood narrowed her eyes. There was no way she would let this empire, built on blood and tyranny, rise again. The final moments of this battle had arrived, and she would end it on humanity's terms. "We're not leaving anything behind. Push forward," she ordered. The ground trembled as waves of human soldiers stormed the palace gates. Inside, the Overlord's elite guards, soldiers who had once been untouchable in their power, scrambled to defend their rulers. The human soldiers knew what was at stake, and they pressed on, determined to wipe out the last remnants of this dark empire. Inside the palace, the Supreme Overlord and his remaining council of leaders gathered in what appeared to be their last stronghold. The walls were lined with alien technology, and strange, glowing symbols pulsed faintly in the dim light. The weight of failure hung heavy in the air. "We have no choice," the Supreme Overlord muttered to his closest advisor, his voice raspy with defeat. "Activate the final protocol. Let the galaxy burn." The advisor hesitated for a moment, fear flashing in his eyes. "Are you sure, my lord? This is a last resort. It will destroy everything." "The humans are too much for us," the Supreme Overlord growled. "We cannot afford to lose. If we fall, the galaxy will fall with us." And so, with a final command, the Supreme Overlord set in motion a cataclysmic event. Deep beneath the palace, hidden in an ancient vault, a device began to hum to life. The device was more than just a weapon. It was a galaxy-wide distress signal designed to trigger the collapse of star systems, warping spacetime itself, a failed experiment in their efforts to assert dominance. The Overlord's most dangerous creation. Meanwhile, Blackwood and her forces continued their assault. With every step, they were getting closer to the heart of the palace, closer to ending this war once and for all. "We're almost there, Captain," one of her commanders reported. "We've breached the main hall." "They're cornered." "Good. Keep moving," Blackwood replied, her voice unwavering. However, the moment they reached the heart of the palace, a terrible shockwave rippled through the air. The lights flickered, and the ground beneath their feet shook violently. For a brief moment, even Blackwood was thrown off balance. She quickly regained her footing and looked to her commanders. "What's happening?" she asked. "Captain, we're detecting an anomaly. Something is pulling energy from all over the planet. It's like the entire planet is being destabilized." The tactical officer shouted, panic creeping into his voice. Blackwood's mind raced. The Overlords had activated something catastrophic. They were attempting to take the entire planet down with them. "Captain, the Overlord device. It's active," the officer yelled. "It's going to collapse this entire star system if we don't stop it." "Then stop it," Blackwood ordered, her voice filled with determination. She had no choice. She had to protect her people. The human forces, now spread out across the palace, were too far from the device to stop it in time. Blackwood knew that she had to act personally. With a team of elite soldiers, Blackwood made her way toward the vault where the Overlords had hidden their ultimate weapon. The walls seemed to pulse with a sinister energy as they advanced, each step forward heavy with the knowledge that failure would lead to the destruction of everything they had fought for. They reached the vault door, and Blackwood took a deep breath. "This is it," she said quietly. "Prepare yourselves." The door was sealed with the Overlord's highest-level security measures, but Blackwood was prepared. A single shot from her plasma cutter melted through the door in seconds. Inside, the massive device hummed ominously, sending shocks through the air. It was a massive spherical machine, surrounded by an array of energy conduits. The device was massive, its dark surface pulsing as if alive. "We need to disable it," Blackwood said urgently. "Now." Her team immediately moved into action, working quickly to disable the energy core and wiring. Every second felt like an eternity. The power growing inside the device threatened to tear the very fabric of space itself. "Captain," one of her soldiers shouted, "we're running out of time. The energy surge is reaching critical levels." Blackwood's heart raced as the countdown reached its final moments. The Overlords had given everything for one final act of destruction, but humanity would not allow that to happen. With a single decisive strike, Blackwood disabled the power source, and the device flickered out, its dark energy collapsing in on itself. The shockwave rippled through the vault, but the imminent threat was averted. The Overlord device, their final weapon, had been neutralized. But as Blackwood stood there, breathing heavily, she knew the battle was far from over. The Overlords might have been defeated, but the future of the galaxy was still uncertain. They had won, but at what cost? The tension between the remnants of the Overlord's forces and the growing power of humanity was far from over. This was just the beginning of a much larger war. But for now, humanity had proven its strength. The Overlords' empire was gone. The dawn of a new empire. With the destruction of the Overlord device, the planet was saved, and the galaxy was spared from certain destruction. But the victory came at a great cost. The battle had ravaged entire cities, and the human forces had sustained heavy losses. The Overlords were no more, but the true weight of the war was still felt by every soldier, every leader, and every survivor. Captain Blackwood stood on the steps of the palace, gazing out over the smoldering remains of the once glorious capital. The sun was setting, casting a dark red glow over the horizon. The sight should have been triumphant, but instead, it felt hollow. The war was over, but humanity's role in the galaxy had only just begun. "Captain," one of her commanders called, his voice filled with reverence. "The Overlord's throne room has been secured. Their council has been captured. What are your orders?" Blackwood turned toward the commander, her mind clouded with 1,000 thoughts. She had been through countless battles, but this one had been different. They had defeated an empire, yes, but what came next? How would the galaxy, still broken and divided, respond to humanity's rise? "The first thing we do," Blackwood said slowly, "is send a message to the galaxy." A few hours later, Blackwood stood before the gathered leaders of the human forces. The remnants of the Overlord's council were brought before her, shackled and powerless. There were no more tricks, no more armies to command. They were defeated. The humans had triumphed, but Blackwood knew that the true challenge was yet to come. The council sat in silence, their eyes full of fear. The power they once held was gone. The galaxy was no longer theirs to control. It was now in the hands of humanity. Blackwood raised her voice to address the assembly, her tone firm and resolute. "The Overlords ruled this galaxy with fear and oppression for centuries. Their reign is over, and with it, the old ways. Humanity has risen, not out of malice, but out of necessity. We have fought for our survival, and now we stand at the threshold of a new era." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. She looked directly at the defeated council, her eyes unwavering. "You were right to fear us. We are not the same as the beings you have ruled for so long. We fight for freedom. We fight for justice. We fight for a galaxy where all life can thrive without the boot of tyranny crushing it." One of the council members, an alien with dark, twisted features, sneered at Blackwood. "You think you can change the galaxy? You are nothing but a passing storm. We are the ones who shaped this galaxy. We were its rulers, its gods." Blackwood stepped forward, her gaze steely. "Not anymore. You are nothing. And we will see to it that your kind never rises again." The council members fell silent, their arrogance replaced with cold fear. They had no power left, no armies, no weapons. The tide had turned. Humanity had become the dominant force in the galaxy. Blackwood turned away from the council and addressed her commanders. "We are not here to rule, but to rebuild. We will form alliances. We will extend a hand to those who need it. And we will make sure that what the Overlords built with lies and violence will be replaced with unity and peace." As the human forces began to consolidate their victory, the once powerful Overlord Empire began to crumble. But the human spirit, their drive to fight for what was right, would not be crushed. They would rebuild, and they would shape the future of the galaxy, not through fear and oppression, but through strength, courage, and compassion. Blackwood stood tall, knowing that their victory was only the first step in humanity's greater destiny. There were still other threats in the galaxy, other factions that would test their resolve. But humanity had proven something important today. They would not back down. They would fight, and they would prevail. The galaxy would remember this day. It would remember the day when humanity answered the call to save it, and it would remember that when humanity entered the battle, it was not as conquerors, but as saviors. The future was now in their hands. The galaxy would never be the same again.